You see that hill? That ordinary hill covered in grass and wildflowers? In 1950, it became hell on earth for 600 American soldiers who never expected to be there. They called it Hill 303, just a number on a military map. But for the men of the 5th Cavalry Regiment trapped on its slopes during the Korean War, it would become something else entirely. A place where ordinary men discovered what they were truly made of. Where mailmen, factory workers, and farm boys from places like Ohio and Texas found themselves fighting not just for a piece of land, but for each other. Picture this. August 14th, 1950. The temperature hits 95 degrees. You're carrying 60 pounds of gear up a hill so steep you have to grab rocks and roots just to keep climbing. Your canteen ran dry hours ago. Your feet are bleeding inside your boots. And somewhere in the forest around you, thousands of North Korean soldiers are closing in. Private First Class Robert Harper was 19 years old. 6 months earlier, he was working at his father's hardware store in Kansas. Now he's digging a foxhole with his bare hands because the supply trucks never made it through. The shovels never came. Neither did the ammunition resupply they desperately needed. "We're not supposed to be here," someone whispered in the darkness. But they were. What makes a man stay when every instinct screams run? What makes him share his last drops of water with a stranger who yesterday was just another face in the unit? When the first mortars started falling that night, tearing through trees and earth and men with equal indifference, these questions stopped being philosophical. You want to know what courage really looks like? It's not the movies, it's not glory. It's Corporal James Mitchell from Detroit, shot twice in the stomach, refusing evacuation because he knows they need every rifle on the line. It's him propping himself against a tree stump, reloading magazines for other soldiers because his hands still work even if his legs don't. They held that hill for 5 days. 5 days without resupply. 5 days of attacks that came in waves, each one threatening to wash them off that hillside like a tide of steel and fire. 5 days of making ammunition last when it should have run out on day 2. Of counting grenades like precious stones. Of watching the tree line for movement until your eyes burned and played tricks in the darkness. Have you ever wondered what goes through a man's mind when he realizes he might not make it home? On Hill 303, they stopped wondering. They knew. The North Koreans hit them at dawn on the second day. Not a probe, not a test. A full assault with mortars dropping so thick the air itself seemed to explode. Machine gun fire that turned trees into splinters. The sound. You can't imagine the sound. Like the world ripping apart at the seams. Sergeant William Cole had been in World War II. Normandy. The Bulge. He thought he'd seen it all. But this was different. In Europe, you usually knew where the front line was. Here, the enemy came from. Everywhere. They flowed through the valleys like water, climbed the reverse slopes, appeared where they shouldn't be. The hill that was supposed to be a simple observation post had become an island in a sea of enemies. Fix bayonets. 2 words that change everything. When Sergeant Cole gave that order, every man on that hill understood. They were out of ammunition, for the heavy weapons, down to their last magazines. The enemy was 50 yards away and closing. This wasn't going to be a firefight anymore. This was going to be something our grandfathers would have recognized. Something primitive. Something that strips away 20 centuries of civilization in a heartbeat. You think you know yourself. You think you understand your limits. But until you're standing in a foxhole, watching hundreds of enemy soldiers charging up a hill toward you, feeling the weight of that rifle with its gleaming bayonet, you know nothing. Private Danny Thompson from Milwaukee was shaking so hard he couldn't light his last cigarette. 2 minutes later, he was fighting hand to hand with a fury that surprised everyone, including himself. What transforms a bakery worker into a warrior? Fear? Anger? Or is it something deeper? That ancient understanding that the man next to you is counting on you, and you will not let him down. They held the line. Barely. When the sun finally climbed high enough to burn off the morning mist, the hillside looked like a painting of hell. Bodies everywhere. American and North Korean tangled together where they'd met with bayonets and rifle butts and bare hands. The sweet smell of cordite mixed with something worse. Something you never forget. But they were still there. Still holding their ground. Lieutenant Robert Anderson crawled from position to position, redistributing ammunition from the dead to the living. 1 bullet here, 3 there. A half-empty magazine was treasure. He'd been hit in the shoulder but kept moving, leaving a trail of blood in the dirt. When someone tried to bandage him, he pushed them away. "Save it for someone who needs it," he said. Everyone needed it. How long can the human body survive without water? On Hill 303, they found out. By the 3rd day, the heat had become another enemy. It pressed down on them like a physical weight, turning their mouths to cotton, their thoughts to fog. The wounded moaned not just from pain but from thirst. Some men started seeing things that weren't there. Phantom soldiers in the tree line, imaginary streams of cool water just beyond the perimeter. Corporal David Park had an idea. Crazy, maybe suicidal, but an idea. There was a stream at the bottom of the hill. 500 yards through enemy territory. He volunteered to go. So did Private Marcus Jefferson, a quarterback from Alabama who could run like the wind. They took every canteen they could carry. You're watching them disappear into the forest. You're counting minutes. 5, 10, 20. The silence is worse than gunfire because at least gunfire tells you someone's still alive. 30 minutes. 40. Some men start to pray. Others just stare at the tree line, willing those 2 figures to reappear. Then, movement. But it's not them. It's another attack, forming up. You can see them massing in the valley, hundreds of them, and you've got maybe 50 rounds left per man. Maybe. The machine guns are down to their last belts. The mortars have been silent since yesterday. No ammunition. You're looking at your rifle, at your last 2 grenades, and doing the math that every soldier learns to do. How many can I take with me? That's when Jefferson bursts from the tree line. Alone. Running like death itself is chasing him. Canteens bouncing, crashing against each other with a sound like bells. Like hope. Enemy fire erupts behind him. Bullets snapping through the air, kicking up dirt at his feet. 20 yards. 10. He dives into the perimeter and hands start grabbing. Canteens before he even stops rolling. Where's Park? Jefferson can barely speak. He's gasping, pointing back. Stayed behind. Said someone had to slow them down. Said to tell his wife. The words are lost in the sound of incoming mortars. Water. Just a mouthful for each man, but it might as well be champagne. It might as well be life itself. They pass the canteens hand to hand, making sure the wounded get theirs first. Making sure everyone gets something. And in that moment, sharing those precious drops, they're not just soldiers anymore. They're brothers. The attack comes hard, harder than before. But something has changed. That water, Park's sacrifice to get it, has given them something more than physical relief. It's given them rage, controlled, focused rage. The kind that turns exhausted men into something fiercer than fresh troops. They fight with a fury that surprises even them. Jefferson, still catching his breath, burns through magazine after magazine, calling out targets with the same precision he once called plays. The line bends but doesn't break. When the ammunition runs low, they throw rocks. When the rocks run out, they prepare to meet the enemy with whatever they have left. What do you write in a letter you might never send? On the 4th night during a lull in the fighting, they wrote home, using whatever they could find, backs of ration boxes, pages torn from notebooks, anything. By matchlight and moonlight, men who hadn't picked up a pen in months suddenly became poets. Dear Mary, Private Tony Rossetti wrote to his girl in Boston, I want you to know that I'm thinking of you. That picture you sent, the one at the beach, I look at it every day. If I don't make it back, know that you made me happy. Know that I was trying to be the man you believed I was. You see them scattered across the hillside, each in his own small world of memory and longing. Some write quickly, urgently, trying to compress a lifetime of feelings into a few sentences. Others stare at the blank paper for long minutes, unsure how to begin. How do you tell your mother you're scared when you've spent your whole life trying to be strong for her? How do you tell your kid brother to take care of things when he's only 12? Sergeant Cole collected the letters, promised to get them out, if he made it, and they didn't. Then he sat down and wrote his own, to a son who was probably taking his first steps right about now. A son he'd seen for exactly 3 days before shipping out. "Be good to your mother," he wrote. "She's the strongest person I know, stronger than any soldier. When you're old enough, she'll tell you about me. Just know that right now, on this hill in Korea, I'm thinking of you, I'm fighting for you, and I'm proud to be your father." The Chinese entered the war that night. Different uniforms, different tactics, fresh troops with full ammunition loads. They came in human waves, bugles screaming, so many that the muzzle flashes lit up the hillside like daylight. The Americans met them with everything they had left, which wasn't much, but it was enough. Barely. When dawn came, the hill looked like something from another world. Shell holes overlapped shell holes, not a tree left standing. The ground itself was transformed, geography rewritten by high explosives and desperation, and still, impossibly, the flag flew. Tattered, burnt, more holes than fabric, but flying. Private Jefferson found Park's body 50 yards down the slope. He'd held them off long enough, taking 7 of them with him. In his pocket, a half-finished letter to his parents. Jefferson took it, added it to the collection, promised Park he'd see it delivered. They'd lost half their number. The wounded outnumbered the whole, but they were still there, still holding. You know what real leadership looks like? It's not speeches. It's not inspiration. It's Lieutenant Anderson, wounded 3 times now, crawling from hole to hole in broad daylight under sniper fire to check on his men. It's him joking with a kid whose legs are shattered, making him laugh through the morphine haze. It's him giving his last morphine cigarette to someone else, then biting down on a rifle sling when they dig shrapnel out of his back without anesthetic. 5th day, the final day, though they didn't know it yet, the enemy had pulled back during the night, not retreating, preparing. You could feel it in the air, that electric tension before the storm. Everyone knew this would be it, the final push. They'd either hold or they wouldn't, but either way it would end today. "Listen up," Anderson called out, his voice carrying despite the weakness trying to drag it down. "I know you're tired. I know you're hurt. I know you want to be anywhere but here. But we've held this hill for 4 days. 4 days. The 5th Cavalry doesn't quit. We didn't quit at Leyte. We didn't quit in the Admiralties. And we're not quitting now." They had 17 able-bodied men left. 17 out of the 600 who'd climbed this hill. The rest were dead, wounded, or missing. 17 men to hold a position meant for a battalion. The math was impossible. But mathematics had stopped mattering somewhere around day 2. What matters when math fails? When logic says you should be dead? When every reasonable assessment says the next attack will sweep you away like leaves? Heart matters. Will matters. The man next to you matters. They redistributed ammunition one last time. 2 magazines per man. 1 grenade each. Bayonets fixed. They knew what was coming. You could hear them forming up in the dead ground, thousands of them. The biggest attack yet. The wounded who could still hold a rifle dragged themselves to the line. Men with 1 working arm. Men who could barely see through the blood. Men who had no business being upright. Corporal Mitchell, gutshot and dying, propped himself up with the last of the bar ammunition. "Well, boys," he said, managing a grin that belonged on a baseball field, not a battlefield. "Let's make them remember us." The attack came with the dawn. Mortars, artillery, everything they had. The earth itself seemed to come apart. Men were, buried in their holes by the concussion, had to claw their way back to air and light only to find the enemy already inside the perimeter. This wasn't battle anymore. This was survival measured in seconds, in inches, in the space between heartbeats. Jefferson went down swinging, 3 enemy soldiers on him at once. Anderson shot 2 off him, but the 3rd got through. Cole's bar ran dry and he used it like a club until it broke, then fought with his hands. All along the line, 17 became 15, became 12, became 8, each man selling himself as dearly as possible. That's when the shells started falling on the enemy positions. Have you ever heard the most beautiful sound in the world? For the 8 men still standing on Hill 303, it was the whistle of friendly artillery. The crack and roar of American guns reaching out from miles away to embrace that hilltop with protective fire. The cavalry, the rest of the 5th Cavalry, had finally broken through. But the enemy didn't know they were beaten. Not yet. They pressed the attack even as their own men were torn apart by the barrage. The hilltop became a cauldron of fire, and steel friend and foe so intermingled that some shells fell on American positions too. Cole pulled a wounded North Korean soldier into his foxhole to protect him from his own side's shells, then shared his last drops of water with the man who'd been trying to kill him moments before. You want to understand humanity? War doesn't destroy it, it reveals it. In the worst moments, in the depths of hell, you see what people really are, and sometimes what you see is beautiful. The relief force fought their way up the southern slope. Fresh troops, clean uniforms, full ammunition loads. They looked like visitors from another world to the scarecrows holding the summit. When they reached the top, they stopped in shock. The position looked like the surface of the moon. Nothing left standing, nothing recognizable as the hill they'd been ordered to relieve. And in the middle of it all, 8 men, 8 ghosts covered in blood and dirt and glory, still holding their rifles, still ready to fight. "Hill 303 secure, sir," Anderson reported, swaying on his feet, blood seeping through bandages that were more dirt than cloth. Then he collapsed. The medics worked frantically. Plasma, morphine, pressure bandages. They loaded the wounded onto stretchers, worked on them as they carried them down. Every one of those 8 men would survive, everyone. Mitchell, gutshot and given up for dead 3 times, would live to see his grandson join the army 50 years later. Anderson would keep the scars but lose the limp, eventually. Cole would wake up in a hospital in Japan, wondering if it had all been a dream until he saw Jefferson in the next bed. But what about the others? The ones who didn't make it off that hill? They went back for them. Everyone. You don't leave men behind. Not in the 5th Cavalry. Not anywhere. So they went back, the relief troops and the walking wounded together, to bring their brothers home. What they found on that hilltop would stay with them forever. Letters. Dozens of them scattered among the positions, some tucked carefully in pockets, others held in hands that would never let go. They collected them all, every word of love and hope and fear that those men had written in their final hours. Sacred documents, last testaments, Private Rossetti's letter to Mary in Boston, Park's unfinished message to his parents, Sergeant Cole's note to his infant son. He'd survived to deliver it himself, but he kept it anyway, a reminder. They found 19-year-old Harper still in his foxhole, rifle pointed downslope, 3 enemy soldiers dead in front of his position. In his pocket, a letter that began, "Mom, don't be sad." You know what they also found? Evidence of something extraordinary. Positions where Americans and North Koreans had died literally on top of each other, locked in hand-to-hand combat. Bandages on enemy wounded, treated by American medics even as the battle raged. Shared canteens. Shared humanity in the middle of inhumanity. The official report would be clinical. Hill 303 held against repeated enemy attacks. Estimated enemy casualties, 3,000. American casualties, 592 out of 600 engaged, 8 survivors. The report wouldn't mention the letters, wouldn't mention Park staying behind so others could drink, wouldn't mention Mitchell firing a bar with his intestines held in by a belt, wouldn't capture what really happened on that hill. But the men who were there would remember, and they would tell others. And slowly, the story would spread, not through official channels but through the real network that keeps military history alive. Soldiers talking to soldiers, veterans sharing with veterans, the whispered legends that matter more than any formal record. They awarded medals, of course, lots of them. But ask any survivor and they'd trade every medal for one more day with the men who didn't come home. Ask them what honor means and they'll tell you about a hardware store clerk from Kansas who held his position until he ran out of ammunition, then held it with his fists. Ask them about courage, and they'll describe a quarterback from Alabama running through hell to bring back water. What happens to heroes when the war ends? They go home. They become ordinary again. They stock shelves, fix cars, teach school, raise families. They don't talk about it much. When someone thanks them for their service, They nod politely, but think of the ones who gave more. When their kids ask about the medals in the drawer, they change the subject. But at night sometimes they're back on that hill. Jefferson couldn't watch football anymore. The sound of the crowd, the roar when bodies collided, it took him right back. He became a teacher instead, history and civics, never mentioning his own place in the story he taught. But his students noticed things. The way he'd stare out the window sometimes, seeing something that wasn't there. The way he'd flinch at unexpected sounds. The way he treated the flag with a reverence that went beyond ritual. Anderson went back to engineering, built bridges instead of destroying them. But he kept every letter the survivors wrote to each other over the years. They stayed in touch. These 8 men bound by 5 days that defined them more than the decades that followed. They met when they could, grew old, watched their numbers dwindle. Cole's son, the infant he'd written to on that hill, grew up to be a soldier too. When Cole tried to talk him out of it, the boy, a man by then, said, "Dad, you taught me that some things are worth fighting for. Some people are worth protecting. How can I do less than you did?" They went back once, the survivors. Korea had changed, modernized beyond recognition, but the hill was still there, covered in grass and wildflowers again, peaceful in the morning sunlight. They climbed it slowly, old men with old wounds, and stood at the top in silence. No monument marked the spot. No plaque told the story. Just an ordinary hill that had once been the center of the universe for 600 Americans. Mitchell brought a bottle of bourbon. Good stuff, saved for the occasion. They poured drinks for themselves and empty cups for the missing. 592 empty cups. They drank in silence, remembering faces, remembering names, remembering impossible courage on an impossible hill. "Think they know?" Jefferson asked finally. "The ones who didn't make it. Think they know we remember?" "They know," Anderson said, "and maybe they did. You want to know what those 5 days mean? What any of it means? Look around you. Everything you see, everything you take for granted, exists because somewhere, sometime, ordinary people did extraordinary things. Because a baker from Milwaukee found courage he didn't know he had. Because a quarterback from Alabama ran through hell for his brothers. Because men who could have run chose to stand. Hill 303 wasn't unique. Across Korea, across every war America has fought, there are hills like this, unmarked, unnamed in your history books, but paid for in blood and courage and lives that ended too soon. Each one a story of ordinary Americans discovering what they were capable of when everything depended on it. We live in a different world, now. Connected, comfortable, complex. The wars are different. The weapons are different. But people haven't changed. Inside every accountant, every store clerk, every student, there's the same potential that turned farmers into heroes on a hill in Korea. The same capacity for courage, for sacrifice, for love that transcends fear. The last reunion was in 2015. 3 of them left by then. Anderson, Jefferson, and one more, Private Tommy Chen from San Francisco, who'd lost his left eye on day 3 but kept fighting because, as he put it, "I only needed one eye to aim." They met at Cole's funeral. Mitchell had gone 2 years before. The others scattered across the years like autumn leaves. They didn't climb the hill this time, didn't need to. They carried it with them, had carried it for 65 years. Instead, they sat in a hotel bar, 3 old men among the business travelers and tourists, invisible in their ordinary clothes. But if you knew how to look, you could see it. In the way they sat backs to the wall. In the way they watched the room without seeming to. In the way they were still, after all these years, watching each other's backs. "My grandson asked me if I'm a hero," Chen said, staring at his whiskey. "I told him no. I told him the heroes are the ones who didn't come home. We're just the ones who remember." They raised their glasses one more time. To Park, who stayed behind. To Harper, 19 forever. To all of them, the whole impossible, glorious, heartbreaking roster of the 5th Cavalry, who climbed a hill in Korea and became immortal. Listen. Can you hear them? On quiet nights, if you know how to listen, you can still hear the echoes. Not of gunfire, that fades. Not of explosions, and those are just noise. But voices. Young voices, impossibly young, calling to each other across the darkness. Hold the line. Watch your left. I got you, brother. We're still here. They're all gone now. The 8 who survived Hill 303. The last was Jefferson, who died in his sleep in 2019, 90 years old, surrounded by grandchildren who knew him as the gentle teacher who grew the best tomatoes in Alabama. But on his bedside table they found a letter, written recently, the handwriting shaky but clear. To the men of Hill 303 it began, "I'll be seeing you soon." What did those 5 days mean? They meant that when America needed them, ordinary men became extraordinary. They meant that freedom isn't free. It's paid for in installments by each generation, and the price is always blood. They meant that somewhere in Korea, there's a hill that belongs forever to the 5th Cavalry, bought with courage that defies understanding. But mostly they meant this, that love is stronger than fear. Love for the man next to you. Love for ideals bigger than yourself. Love that transforms a hardware clerk, a baker, a quarterback, a teacher into something eternal, something unbreakable. The hill is quiet now. Grass and wildflowers cover the scars. Families picnic where men once died for each other. Children play where heroes bled, and that's how it should be. That's what they were fighting for. For normal to return, for peace to grow where war had been, for children to play on hills without knowing their history. But we should know. We should remember. Not the tactics, not the strategy, not the politics that put them there. Remember the men. Remember 19-year-old boys who became immortal. Remember that inside you, inside all of us, there's the same spark that lit up that hillside with impossible courage. Remember Hill 303. Remember that when everything seems lost, when the odds are impossible, when you're down to your last magazine, and the enemy is coming, that's when ordinary people discover what they're really made of. That's when heroes are born. They never expected to defend that hill, but they did. For 5 days that echo through eternity, they did. What hill will you defend when your time comes? Like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. This channel is for those who believe history is made not only by armies, but by individual courage.